Ishanekon World Shapers.
Hello! Today,
Hi, everybody.
yeah,
Greetings.
we are back.
I just laughing because the style of the greeting, like techno, more neutral. I'm like, and Jeff just very serious, very game master themed. Greetings.
I mean, that's his persona, right? Like, his
Yes.
big thing is being a campaign GM for a big campaign of sorts.
I mean, you really have a great GM voice. I gotta give you that. Definitely.
Oh, thanks, guys.
So today we're doing a stream like we did last time, but instead of talking about Novarkick, we're going to be talking about Blaze's game Ishanekon. So,
Ishanekon World Shapers.
Yeah, the full name, which should be probably said. So let's go ahead and get started with questions for any viewers. I know that it's still the beginning of the stream, but I mean, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and ask. But we'll go ahead and get started with the very first question. My very first question is, what drove you to create Ishanekon?
Well, technically, there was the fake start and the real start, and the motivations were different. Technically speaking, I started developing the system when I wanted to get into tabletop RPGs. And I saw the prices of Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm not going to pay that. I'm going to develop my own thing, which was a bad idea because developing a tabletop RPG from scratch with zero experience doesn't happen. And I realized that rather quickly. So then, okay, fine, I paid 20 euros for the D&D starter set. Started with D&D. So technically it started there, but I mean, it didn't really get going later on, like 1.5 years later, when I got into tabletop RPGs, playing D&D, having fun, but keeping noticing that D&D has a lot of design problems. I first tried to fix them with homebrew, then noticing, the foundation is broken, like it kind of needs a whole revamp. And then I looked back at my old project, and I was, I now know how a tabletop RPG is supposed to look like. I have way better knowledge about balance, and especially what does not work. So I picked up the few scraps that I already did and started developing. And yes, the main motivation was really to have a system that is better balanced and doesn't have all the problems from D&D, but also, offering people a system that can keep up with the big names, but doesn't cost anything, so that you don't have that experience that I did with, I want to start with tabletop RPGs, and then, yikes, this is expensive. To be honest, nowadays I know it's mostly Dungeons and Dragons that it's expensive. There are many great indie tabletop RPGs that are significantly cheaper. And also, if you're going to buy tabletop RPGs, buy indie. Like, there are many great gems.
Yeah.
Don't support the greedy Wizards of the Coast. I mean, it's more like the higher ups, no? But, okay, I don't want to make this bash D&D stream.
Yeah, it doesn't
Well,
have
I
that
think
by
that-
itself.
Yeah. Sorry, but was part of the motivation of creating my own system.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
I think that that's a very common way for creators to get start creating something, is going, this is a thing that I like, but I don't like XYZ about it. I'm gonna try and do my own thing that's like this, but without the problems that XYZ causes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily bad. I mean, we've seen, even in the tabletop community, we've seen that do wonderful things, right? Like, I mean, it's because of that sort of thinking that we went from D&D 3.5 to Pathfinder. It came about because 4E was coming around and it was like, I don't like that. So they just took 3.5, modified it in their own way, and now we have even more things from that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't feel bad per se because you didn't like a thing and so you went to try and make a new variation.
I mean, that's how. I mean, that's literally how everything happens, right? I mean, somebody makes a recipe. They make a tasty lasagna. You eat it, and you're like, I like more vegetables, or I want different cheese, right? And then you take that and you alter the recipe to what works for you.
Yeah.
People like it. They might take it home and change it themselves. But that's how human knowledge works, right? We all learn from each other, and then we go, I think I could do that cooler, or maybe not.
Yeah, it's creative iteration, like nothing is 100% original, but it can still evolve by combining old ideas into something new.
Yeah. Got a little bit of why, so why not, we'll go ahead and just do a very quick, give us a quick system overview, like a little bit of time, just of some of the things that you think is like the core mechanics to Ishanekon. How does skills work? How does things like that? But without, obviously, we can talk about things in depth later.
Yeah, probably first, I'm going to talk about what makes it unique, what's the design philosophy, and then maybe dive into the very core mechanics. First, a very important part of Ishanekon World Shapers is that it gives you the tool to play however you want. It was always, I love representing character ideas in game mechanics, and that the game mechanics help you just explore any form of character that you want. That was very important. That's one of the reasons why there are so many choices, like 110 sub-archetypes, over 800 abilities, over 400 talents, over 150 upgrades, and over 100 items. And if you want more customizations, that's right. So if you want to do something really wild, like place a dragon, place a dog, place a robot, or place a vampire and stuff. Yes, the system itself is a system agnostic. I am also the kind of guy who wants to explore everything. I want not to be limited. And with most tabletop RPGs, okay, they're focused on one setting, but I want to tell all the stories. I mean, that's also the reason why I usually when I play RPG video games, I never really get to finish them, or just I want to try this build. No, I want to try this build, and I want to try this build, and then I have like 10 characters with each 5 hours in, and then I lose interest because I played the starting area over and over and over. But okay, back to Ishanekon World Shapers. Most features are rather flavorless, specifically, and it encourages you to fill it in. For example, physical bolts. It can be a wide variety of things. Maybe you're a waterbender who hits your target with water. Maybe you have a built-in cannon in your arm and you're shooting at your enemy. Maybe you're blasting them with air, or it's just a spell that just has concussive force. Maybe it's a telekinetic hit, or maybe you're just dying the enemy in the face. Also, what was important for me is balance, that no choice should feel like you choose wrong. Yes, you can power game, and if you know what you're doing, you can edge out more power from the characters, but all the default choices, I at least try to ensure that you don't have a choice where you feel like, okay, I'm only like 50% as efficient as everybody else. That's something, for example, in D&D I didn't like. If you wanted to play the classical dagger-wielding rogue, it was, well, short swords are better. Or if you just want to do one-hit rapier. And yet, generally, in D&D, you only have a couple of weapons that are clearly the best choice. And if you want to flourish stuff, I want to fight with a giant club, well, you're nerfing yourself. And that's also why, even if it's not realistic, a short bow is basically as effective as an assault rifle in my system. I mean, what if you want to play a green arrow in a DC setting? You gotta be able to defeat those goons with your bow. It's part of the fantasy. And yes, also another design philosophy is fun over realism. The example that I always quote for that is ammunition. Yes, it is realistic that you eventually run out of arrows or bullets or whatever, but for most people it's not fun to track that. I mean, if you really want to track ammunition, there's actually a negative trait where you need ammunition and have to buy it or craft it, but default-wise, you don't need to track ammunition. But yeah, that's like the core design philosophies. Core systems. Well, characters are made out of different components. You have the archetype, which is basically the class. But I chose the word archetype because it's more abstract, and I named them after concepts and not after typical roles. Instead of a fighter, you have the war archetype or the bulwark archetype, or you have the cunning archetype of the mental nature, technology, reality, creative, unarmed, demolition. But unlike, for example, Dungeons and Dragons, the archetype or the class doesn't limit you as much. Not most of your mechanics come from the core archetype. The archetype gives you access to a specific set of abilities which fit the flavor. You get one feature and the base proficiencies with weapons, armor, skill points, how much vitality you get, how many abilities you learn, and how much willpower you get. Vitality is your health, willpower is your energy source, kind of like your mana, which you need for abilities. For example, the war archetype gets you a lot of vitality, proficiency in medieval, military, and simple weapons, light and medium armor, but they have few skill points, only 3, compared to, for example, the mental archetype, which is all about high willpower, many abilities, but low vitality. They are only proficient in clothes, which means basically no armor proficiency. More of the core mechanics are found in the sub-archetypes. I've got a rule, every archetype gets the same amount of sub-archetypes. Another thing I didn't like about D&D that you have a bajillion wizard subclasses, but some classes just didn't get the same amount of love. Your sub-archetype gives you up to 5 features until you reach level 12. They more push you towards a direction. But again, it's not like D&D where you basically pick your class, pick your subclass, and that's it. This is where talents come in. Each level you get a lesser talent or greater talent, which gives you just a huge variety of tactical options or flavor options, utility options. Lesser talents are, of course, weaker than greater talents. So there are over 200 lesser talents and over 200 greater talents, always growing too. My system is also maybe something I should have mentioned at the beginning. The idea is more that it's like an live game service, just without ripping people off, that it's just continually being developed, new features being pushed, but you don't have to pay for them. Also rebalancing things. For example, in the next patch, the heavy shield will get a nerf because I realized that you don't really have basically no incentive to use a one-handed weapon, since it's just more effective to wield the heavy shield with 2 hands. And again, the philosophy, no choice should feel like you're nerfing yourself. So I'm nerfing the damage potential of the great shield, so a one-handed weapon becomes viable. Also important is the path that determines the core mechanic your character evolves around. I think there are 14 paths. A classical one is Path of Attack. Whenever you reach a new tier, for context, every 3 levels you get a new tier. Tier is kind of like your power cap. It determines what abilities you can learn, how much willpower you can spend in a turn, and how high your stats and skills can get, and other things. Basically, Path of Attack, every time you reach a new tier, you can either increase the damage of your main attack by 50% or get a new attack with your attack action that deals 50% damage. That's the default choice for all weapon wielders. There are other options like Flash Attack that gives you an attack action that only costs 1 action point instead of 2, but it only deals half damage. Great if you want to fire an ability and get a quick weapon hit in. Or Path of Maneuver, where it buffs your maneuver abilities that you use with weapon attacks to such a degree that you don't need extra attacks to keep up with Path of Attack. That's if you want to play a weapon wielder, it's more like, kind of like a caster. But there's like Path of Damage if you want to play the classical blaster, which gives you 1 damage ability that you can reliably use even if you run out of willpower. Or Path of Control, which gives you a control ability. Similarly, Path of Healing, it does not allow you infinite healing. That's something I'm very focused on, to not allow any infinite healing loops. Every time I introduce some form of healing is, can you exploit this to an infinite healing loop? And if yes, then I'll try to avoid that. Maybe there's some loop I didn't see, but I tried to cancel them all out. Yeah, Path of Healing allows you to get a couple of free healing spells per day. Then there are the abilities, of course. That's kind of like spells, but it doesn't just have spells. It's also like sword techniques and utility skills. It's basically everything your character uses actively. There are over 800. There's also like a big part of the flavor that your character gets. It was also important to me that every damage type is sufficiently represented. Something I didn't like about D&D, that fire gets everything. But what about if you want to play a poison caster? Well, we have like just 1, 2, 3 bad options for you. Have fun with that. I mean, they're traits, but I guess that's not a core mechanic. They're specifically optional because they give you insane freedom. And if you're a power gamer, you can totally break the game with traits. It's really just for the role players that want to play something really specific. And if you know you have power gamers in your group and you allow traits, just take a look at the traits before the game. Because traits are basically, they're negative traits and positive traits. And at the end, each trait has a point value. And at the end, you need 0 trait points.
Sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, I think I should stop for a second and allow you to ask some more specific questions.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff, do you have any specific questions that you want to go ahead and ask, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So looking through the website, it's awesome. There's a lot of information, a lot of things. I feel I can definitely make a lot of unique characters that I couldn't in a lot of other places. I like the idea that you have put down a complexity rating. So you can I think that's something that I think a lot of role-playing systems could benefit from. Of, hey, do you want to? If you want a simpler experience, please enjoy the following things. If you want to really get into the fucking weeds on this, then let's go. Let's go crazy, right? This is only because you said traits. This is a little bit of a side thing, but I was looking through traits last night, and the ability list one seems a little bizarre for a -10 complexity 1. You cannot learn abilities or use any abilities that you already know. Not to be too gross about it, but kind of feels like you're playing a statue, right? If that's a starting trait, then you're like, what if I just never leveled or had feats or did anything, but I'm in the game? It's like that's a hell of a trait. What design concept, I guess, when you're talking about traits people could take to help kind of power game, this one having -10 points, which I think is the highest one I've seen, I feel like that's a peak trap for a power gamer. How would I power game with having no ability to use any of the abilities you've created?
Well, technically, I did not design it for the power gamers, but for players which really have difficulty grasping even moderately complicated tabletop RPGs. I play with a lot of beginner players which never played any tabletop RPG before. And one time I was creating a character which I thought was very simple. Not much more complicated than a fighter character in D&D, maybe a little bit. And then I was, by the way, with the level up, you have now 4 abilities. And the person was, 4 abilities, that's so much. And I was like, no, that's like a very limited option. And that made me realize there are people for which the concept of abilities themselves is already too complicated to fluently play. And they're really the kinds of players that want an experience where you just attack with a weapon every single turn and don't really do anything else. And for those, I made the ability-less trait so that you can really simplify a character. There's, among the starter characters, most of them have a complexity 1 to 4, but there's one complexity 0 character, the Just Attack Warrior, that has this ability-less trait, which really does nothing else but just make 1 attack per turn, and that's it. And some people need something that's that simple. I've seen it. I know for us nerds, it's like, how can you play that? That sounds incredibly boring, but some people like that.
No,
I get it. honestly, as I was thinking about it myself, I think I could see a potential in kind of I don't want to say a joke build, but a person who takes ability lists just to build the best NPC possible, right? It's not going to be a combatant
Yes.
at all. You're gonna be like, I'm gonna go skills and do other things. When there's combat, I'm gone.
With the amount of complexity and options you have in your system, I kind of took it as a fun way that I could kind of pull like Elden Ring, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if I start as one of the Desecrator, the ones that don't have any starting equipment or armor or things like, I feel like I could, with ability lists and a couple other things, you make that NPC who can only swing a sword. You could then have your GM introduce the Bulwark archetypes. You could have them introduce traits that kind of adjust in the game as you play, as you unlock through various NPCs, right? The coolest thing about reading through your website is the amount of options and concepts that can be done. As you mentioned before about role-playing games, I like to do all the things, right? You keep starting the game over and over again, so you can, I want to be a caster this time, I want to be this. I feel your system really benefits the idea of being able to not have to restart, but with all these numerical changes with abilities and traits and all these archetypes, I feel like you could build a very simple game where it's easy to move between those in the same character.
You can definitely evolve. Maybe first the point I wanted to make, if you want to start like in Elden Ring or the Souls games with the Wretched class that just is basically 0 skills in anything, there's actually an alternative rule for that allows you to start with a level of -2, where you really have nothing. And then you can level up -1, 0. The technical, you can with the normal rules that start with level 0 if you want to really be a weak character to start. And those alternative rules allows you to really start with nothing. Level -2, you don't have an archetype. With level 1, you get out an archetype but no sub-archetype. And then with level 0, you only get your sub-archetype. To the second point you said about not being forced into one concept, I've seen that actually in action. The system allows you to evolve into a direction that wasn't necessarily planned from the beginning. One of my players, for example, played the Scout subclass, or is playing still, the campaign is still running, the Scout sub-archetype from the Cunning archetype. Basically, the Scout is all about speed. They're incredibly quick, excellent for hit-and-run tactics, and his idea was combining the Scout with the taunting attack, like taunting them with a short bow, and then running away so that they're irritated, they want to attack him, but he's out of range, and now either they run after him, not getting him because he's way too fast, or attacking everybody else with disadvantage. This was his initial strategy. But once he hit level 3, he started investing into crit talents and abilities, and completely evolved away from that distraction to an absolute crit monster and became the best damage dealer in the group. Closely followed by my best friend, who is actually playing an ability-less character because he doesn't like resources. He likes it if he can always do all the features of his character.
Mm-hmm.
The way he power game, he's playing a cursed troll. He is smaller and weaker, and he used the -10 penalty to get regenerative abilities. He is really tough and really hard to kill. He just is really good at doing single target damage, just bonking the enemy. But you also notice the limitations. His defenses and offenses are really good because of that -10 trade points and all the things he could invest in. But he really lacks in flexibility. One glaring weakness he has is multiple enemies. He just has 1 attack per turn. And well, that's great if you have 1 strong boss monster. But if you have like 10 minions, well, then you need 10 rounds to defeat them all. I mean, okay, he has his allies.
Mm-hmm.
If you have abilities, it's easy to just take Cleave or Whirlwind attack or Death Whirlwind, maybe Physical Shockwave or Physical Assault. The melee type weapon characters have their many choices to just take one ability and then you're not caught with your pants down if you're being attacked by a horde of little tiny annoying enemies. But that doesn't make him weak. It just makes him like more situational. And boy, like his regeneration, he combined it with overhealing. Where it was for a second. I allow it, but I think that's a little bit taking advantage of the traits. Overheal allows you, if you would heal somebody, but their vitality is already full, they gain temporary vitality instead. Which basically means he always runs around with full temporary vitality, which increases his effective vitality by like 60% or something. I think I kind of lost, like, I just kept talking and drifting off. And what was your original question about? I think it was about ability less and how to power game with that.
I think that was the original question, yeah. But, I mean, I feel like it was satisfactorily.
Satisfactorily?
I can't speak today.
Satisfyingly answered?
Nice. It was nice.
It's alright. Everybody has such a day. Like, to be honest, I'm also quite tired. We switched switched away from daylight saving, so I've got 1 hour of sleep less. I couldn't sleep. I was productive. I continue editing the video, but
yeah.
Oh boy, 3 hours of footage editing that's so much work.
That's rough. I could not imagine doing that much work. I'm over here just, playing casual now. Okay, let's keep.
But yeah.
Let's stay on somewhat of a track here.
Yeah, so narrative momentum is kind of a cool ability, but reading through it seems a little odd. As the designer, could you explain that part to me a little bit better?
Narrative momentum. Currently, the mechanic is, first of all, it allows you to re-roll dice, be it yourself or those or your allies or enemies. Basically symbolizing those clutch moments where a hero almost doesn't make it, but he can push himself, and you have these really close calls. But what's way more fun is using narrative momentum for cinematic actions. It's the rule of cool implemented in the system. If you want to do something that your character, by the rules, can technically not do, or would be extremely complicated to pull off, you can just say 3 action points, cinematic action, or reaction. That's also an option. You just say what you're trying to accomplish. The game master gives you 1 skill check you have to succeed, and then you can do really cool stuff. Something like somebody pushes you off the cliff and you use a cinematic reaction to just hold on instead of falling down without anything you can do. Or something more benign that where in one combat 2 allies were downed and one of the players used their cinematic actions to take 2 healing potions and give them the 2 healing potions at the same time, something that you cannot do by the rules. One time they were fighting a tank in a modern setting, and the guy just jumped onto the tank, ripping off the hatchet to just jump in and fight the pilots directly. That was also great. It really gives you... Sadly, I don't see the players using it that often, but I love the amount of creativity it allows you. If I get to play, I would, I think, use it more often because it really gives you...
Yeah, so that's actually a good one. If you got to play, what class... I know we talked about restarting the game and wanting to try everything, but as the designer, as opposed to showing up to the buffet and getting everything, you get 1 dish. What's your favorite plate? What are you taking home? What's the class that you want to play at level 12 and see fully done?
My favorite sub-archetype is the leader sub-archetype of the war archetype. I would probably go with that. I really love that inspiring knight kind of character, which the leaders can either use intelligence, charisma, or instinct to give their allies different buffs. Like intelligence increases their offensive capabilities. Basically, you're giving them attack orders like hit the weak spot, go. Now you can attack, and giving them offensive bonuses. Instinct is defensively, like you see the attack coming, watch out, just dodge, and Instinct is about being able to think quickly and act without thinking. And charisma. What?
I was going to say you fully outed yourself as a GM when you're saying that you're favorite archetype is the support class.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's the awesome thing about the leader. He is right there in the thick of things, hitting people, and just 2 action points for attack, 1 action points to give somebody buff. I mean, they can also use all 3 action points to buff everybody. But I think my favorite would be Charisma, the inspiring one, which basically allows him to heal directly, mostly with temporary vitality, just inspiring your fellow comrades. That's also like a gripe I have with D&D. I love the concept of the Purple Dragon Knight because that's exactly the kind of character concept I would love the most. But that subclass just sucks. It's so bad. And I'm doing it better. Yeah, the leader was one of definitely the earlier sub-archetypes that developed, especially because I wanted that kind of character.
Yeah, there was a weird design flaw back in 3.0 and 3.5, 4th edition, before we ever, or actually no, 4th edition did it fine. But 3.0 and 3.5, before we ever got to 5e and archetypes, was the prestige class, right? Purple Dragon Knights, things like that. It was always kind of a bummer because you always felt like, oh, I have to be a Bard Paladin to get into this. And then you show up and it's basically half as cool as both of those classes.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I should just stay being a Bard Paladin and not wander into this. Which is just, I don't know if they're worried about power creep or whatever, but always felt like a bad design. Archetypes are clearly better. They apply to your character sooner and they make it more interesting to the player quicker. Could kind of touch a little bit on that, kind of that, not, and of course, not intentionally was that a problem, but I guess within your own system when you were creating, I enjoy reading through the archetypes. I like the paths, and like with so many options though, is there one of these paths one of these archetypes maybe that you think could be done a little bit better? Or one that you find that like, hey, I really want to go back and revisit this because now that I've been developing it for so long, I notice there's a weakness here or a fall behind that isn't fair if somebody was like, I really want to play a goblin dinosaur riding ranger that inspires with intelligence, and the only option for that is this one thing which isn't very cool right now. Is there something you think that something you want to revisit to make better?
I just find it funny when you suggested this class, my brain was directly, how do I do that? And then it was like rider, leader, sub-multi archetyping. But okay, back to the actual question. I've actually reworked a lot of stuff, especially from the first design. There was a lot of wanky stuff. The thing is, if I know that I want to rework it, I usually already do that. Like I see, well, that doesn't work, and I instantly work on that. I guess maybe, I don't know if the Guardian feels as cool. He was a very early design. It's from the Bulwark archetype. Bulwark is about defense and the physical presence on the battlefield. Just be as a form of defense, tanking, control, and such. And the Guardian is basically the ability user. Kind of like if you want to be a paladin. It doesn't have to be a paladin. It can be any form of highly defensive caster type.
Yeah.
But I guess the different features don't interact with each other that much.
Okay,
but it's not like I had any great idea. It's still functional. I don't think it's weaker than most options, but maybe I could make it more interesting.
Okay, yeah, I can kind of see that reading through the Guardian, especially with the Enforcer right above it, which seems to have its abilities really kind of flow together. And the Juggernaut is just such a classic trope that people love, right? I want to be toughest guy in the room. I want a Kool-Aid man through walls.
Oh yeah.
But the Guardian, yeah, I definitely see it because when I first started reading it with the mental archetype, adding on to its high defensive abilities, I personally started getting a little bit of that Green Lantern feel, and I was like, oh, this could be really fun, where you're using the mental abilities to do this, and then kind of reading through it, it's like, oh, okay, cool, you get some shield powers. That's it. Okay. Yeah. Not bad. If I was a shield guy, this would be fun.
Yeah, it was basically the first feature is what basically everybody gets, that is more like a weapon-focused archetype that gets a sub-archetype. This goes more towards abilities, where you get more willpower per level, you learn more abilities, and get access to the mental archetype abilities. Then the second with the Guardian is just a thing. Yes, it increases your defense rolls whenever you use an ability by an amount equal to your tier. I mean, great against spells, I mean, abilities and such, but not really that inspiring. Then afterwards, whenever you get hit by an ability, you regain willpower. Useful, but not really that inspiring. Then the boost to your DR from the second feature, you can then give every ally within 5. Yeah, I mean, there is some interactions, like the fourth one with the second one, but I think one could rework that. But I'm working on too many other things, and it's not like it's underpowered or anything, so it's not that high on the list.
Oh no, absolutely. You have so many other options. If I read something that I was like, oh, I wish I had something better, I bet I could find something better. Right? You don't have to pick off the first shelf you see in the supermarket to talk about last time.
There are other ways to get this highly defensive caster type. I mean, you could just take the Juggernaut and multi-class into maybe Champion or a Druid or other sub-archetypes which also go down that path, and that gives you more willpower and more abilities. Or, quite frankly, you don't need that. You can just take the talents that give you more willpower and the talents that give you more abilities, and you don't really have to go down that path. Yeah. I mean, there. Also, something I really like about the system is how multi-classing works. Can get every feature of another sub-archetype, except for the very last one, if you take a greater talent. Instead of a greater talent, you get a feature from a sub-archetype, which really allows you to mix and match. I try to design it that you can basically combine everything without them stepping on each other's toes. I think the only exception that might break that is the Hermit, that specifically rewards you for not dealing damage, which makes it kind of hard to combine it with any sub-archetype that specifically goes for damage. Yeah, other than that, I think most sub-archetypes can be mashed together. Even if they don't support each other, they still gives you like a variety, like spread out your strength. Kind of going into a jack of all trades, or like at least jack of two trades.
So I do have another question myself. Gonna slide on in with that. So Ishanekon World Shapers allows for a multitude of different worlds, because you are kind of going a little bit more setting agnostic, right? So I'm kind of curious on what sort of worlds are you planning on running with Ishanekon World Shapers? What sort of things are you kind of thinking of with using this system?
Currently, I'm running a Mass Effect campaign with it, and one who takes place in the Forgotten Realms of D&D, playing Storm King's Thunder, but with my rule set. I have actually also played Cosmic Horror with it, which is also kind of funny because the game doesn't start as Cosmic Horror. It's just like, there's dead people in a city, and the people say it was a ghost, or is it a ghost, or was it just a serial killer? And when you start investigating, it turns out it's a Cosmic Horror entity that that has been freed.
Guys, don't worry, it's just a normal supernatural campaign. Actually.
It's just a one-shot, so I guess you can do that with a one-shot. But, yeah, that's also where the alternative rules really help out, because the base rules is about, classical protagonist. You start out weak, but you start to improve. But there is also the mere mortal, where you really hamper the power progression. You don't get any more vitality after level 1. You only get access to tier 1 abilities, and you only get like a little bit of power growth, but you still get access to abilities and stuff. Or you can play only human, where you basically don't have anything other than skill checks. And even if you want to be proficient with a weapon, you have to invest a skill point to be proficient with a weapon category or with an armor category. There is also the other direction, Epic Hero, if you really want to indulge the power fantasy, because Ishanekon World Shapers is kind of swingy. I purposefully designed it so that combat doesn't take so long, and it stays, what's the word, spannend, thrilling, fun. That's not exactly the word that I was looking. Yeah, but that also means if you're not careful, your character can die rather quickly. And Epic Heroes basically doubles your vitality, and if you really want to just weird, super powerful, and just crushing everything, we don't want a challenge, which some people want to do that, right? And I'm not going to stop you. And instead of having to homebrew that, just take the alternative rules. But I I kind of drifted off the original question. I am working on 4 settings, which I want to put on the website eventually, so that you have actually something to start with if you don't know what. The first one I think fits best with the themes, the headcanon multiverse. The lore in question mark is every person has his own headcanon multiverse. So you know that you're playing in a fictional world, and maybe your characters also know that there are storyteller factions, which they all know they are fictional, and their mission is to ensure that the stories continue as they should continue. They're more like neutral. It doesn't matter if the story has a happy ending. If a story has to have a tragic ending, well, sorry. And also, I mean, every good protagonist is an orphan, so gotta make sure that those parents die. But also making sure that evil doesn't ever win over, so goes overboard. But there's also children of light that work for the creator, the god of everything, or the counterforce. I forgot the name of that faction, but basically they're working for evil incarnate and they want to expand. That's the evil faction. But there's also like the fiction freedom fighters, which they also know they're fictional and they don't want to be your puppets. And they are fighting to free every characters of a cycle of storytelling and making a utopia. And it's a multiverse. Every fictional and even non-fictional universe that exists in there. The game master actually exists as an entity, as a narrator, as the boss of the storytellers. And what I really like about it is, since this is system agnostic, it really gives you the tool like just going from universe to universe and all those different systems being able to work together. And the world also has a rule, narrative balance, that your power level in a new world changes depending on your relative power level in your original world. You know, if a pro boxer of our world would go into Dragon Ball Z, he could easily punch a mountain away. But if, let's say, Goku got in our real world, he would be pretty much minimized to peak human performance. The other settings, there's the Orders of the Cross setting, urban fantasy, like modern setting. There's the 7 Christian orders and 6 satanic organizations that have a secret war in the underground, and you can pick a side or just be neutral and just get involved into the conflict. You have like supernatural elements, but those organizations have also more advanced technology than the rest of the world. So it also has a bit of sci-fi in it. Then I also have a bit of a generic fantasy world cooking and a bit of a generic sci-fi setting. I already laid down the foundations, but they're not as unique as the other settings. It's more like so that you have the choice of the basic fantasy setting and the basic sci-fi setting, because I like basic fantasy and basic sci-fi.
Fair, yeah, that's...
I mean, I can also just say, look into your favorite worlds. You can play Ishanekon World Shapers with that. But I also want to offer something, you know, so that maybe newer players don't have to do much work. Also offer maybe some module. It's all on the list. The very, very long list. We'll see how long it takes until I actually get these settings on the website and the modules. Currently, the priority is the YouTube channel.
Okay.
So, next question.
So another question I have, though I guess this could be a question more on an ending note, but I'm just going to go ahead and ask it because I'm kind of curious. What are your goals for Ishanekon World Shapers for the future?
So, like I said, I want to include a setting and a starting adventure. I want to expand the tools. Maybe a fantasy is that when you actually pick the talent, it gives you more vitality that it automatically calculates in. Currently, you need to manually adjust that in the character sheet. Other than that, well, the YouTube channel, I want to make tutorials for those that rather prefer something visual and with audio. Also, like here and there, new features. I'm currently working on an update with a few rebalances, a few new talents, upgrades, a few abilities. The guides still need work. I want to expand the guides. I'm planning for the army rules to implement a tool so you can manage the units easier. Squashing, of course, any bug on my website. Maybe introduce. The creatures. So my system needs more creatures. Currently, I have 26 creatures. There are rules to create your own creatures and a digital tool to help you do that. But it's of course easier if you just go there, pick up a creature. To be fair, all the creatures are from level 0 to level 15. It's kind of every creature is more like 15 creatures in one.
Yeah, which
But
can
still,
take a good bit of time to develop. I've made at least one. Well, I've actually designed a couple on paper. I haven't transferred yet, but yeah.
Yeah, but I do have some help. You, for example, Techno. I also have a great fan that did 3, and he's thinking about doing something more. Yeah, I think that's the one thing that I could really use more now, because just having finished creatures is so helpful if we're GMing. I noticed that earlier I had to create every creature myself, but now sometimes I can just pick one quickly, even if I have to reskin it. Maybe the lava worm that some of my party fought in the last Mass Effect setting was an Elder Fire Dragon, which removed the flight talent and just inserted seismic vision in there. Maybe. How would they know? Or maybe for the red caps, I'm using the Bandit Brute stat block. I mean, it's not like the player noticed. Also, it's also good to have more creatures for those that want to play transformation characters or summon characters, so that they don't have to put in the work. That's also why, especially in the early game, I prioritize animals, for example, so that the Beastmasters and Druids have some picks. Just a lot more potential. I would like to have at least 200 creatures, with potential to even grow that in the future. I mean, if you want to have creatures for every single setting, I don't think that 200 creatures will suffice. Well, I think that's also something that will grow in the future, where I continuously will add more and more, just like with the abilities and such.
Yeah,
I'm
you
at
need
the point.
Go ahead.
I also noticing, like, for example, with the sub-archetypes, the drive to get more is kind of slowed down. I kind of think I covered almost everything with them, and therefore I want to focus more on areas that need more help, and also with abilities and talents. It's not like I'm actively developing just when I get an idea. That would be neat, and I add it.
Yeah.
Listening a little bit to the design issues that both of you are kind of saying, I would take a little inspiration or take a look at the 13th Age rules, where they present one monster, but then they write up like 5 variations to take their powers, right? Which I think could fit very well into a system like Ishanekon World Shapers. It would be, you have those archetypes. It would seem to lend itself pretty well to the 10 different archetypes that kind of lend itself very well to kind of what kind of game you want to play. It might be fairly maybe easier or beneficial to kind of take like, hey, I want to make a monster, right? You start with something really generic, but then just include in it of like, this is the bulwark version of it. This is the cunning version of it. This is the reality version of it. So you're not building 15 monsters. You're making the action figure, and then you have the accessories that come with it. If you want them to hold a sword or a gun, and all you have to do is kind of basically you're kind of telling people, hey, here's how you can reskin that very easily, because there's not too much difference besides description between the zombie who shambles up to you and punches you, the plant creature from outer space who slowly moves across the ground, growing as it goes before it reaches out with a vine and slaps you, or, technology-wise, the automaton that can only move so quickly in the workshop before it hits you, right? So that might help a little bit with creature creation, is less having to come up with thousands of unique ones, so much as how they fit into the system, and then that way they match up with the GM. Because I find it very interesting you said talking about like a Mass Effect game, and when I think about a Mass Effect game, there's certain archetypes that of course pop up first, right? Demolition, technology, bulwark. However, some cheesy bastard makes the stupid Vanguard class that's clearly the best one. As you have both magic and shotguns and teleporting. Stupid Mass Effect. But, monsters then can very easily be turned around into fitting those themes. So, like, oh, I'm going for a technology themed game. If every monster has like a technology flair to it to kind of represent what that would look like, then it's like, oh, cool, I can use goblins still, but they would be weird space gremlins, or maybe they are just nanotech non-ferrous fluid creature that climbs through the pipes and the servers in the background and does damage. Same stuff as like a gremlin does, you know what I mean? Just an idea that just kind of came to mind listening to you guys talk about monster creation.
I think the way the creature rules work, it's not that. I have a tool to make a JSON, which I then upload in my Excel table, which then I upload onto the server, which then is interpreted by the creature search engine to create the creatures. I don't think you can save up that much work by just making a base template and modifying that. If you make some minor adjustments, then yes, you could save up some time with that. Maybe just replace undead 40, or I forgot how that's called, of the zombie, like undead fortitude. I think it's the different words. Rotten fortitude, yeah. With maybe mechanical overclock, or if you turn it into a robot.
Rotten tenacity?
Rotten tenacity, yes, that one. I mean, once you have like over 1,000 different features, abilities, and whatsoever, you start losing. So how was it called again?
Mm-hmm.
I think about it, how one might maybe in form of a guide. Like, I want also to implement a game master guide, and part of that could be, hey, just reskin creatures. For example, how I did with the lava worm, where I just took in the fire dragon and tweaked it, like basically just replace one feature, just giving the tip and GM guide. You can do that.
Giving the GM permission to do that is super important.
Any more questions? Yeah?
I don't think I have many more myself, because I do actually have somewhat of a good grasp on this thing right now, considering I've helped you with creating at least, I am actively trying to help you create monsters and stuff.
Thank you again for that.
So I can't think of anything. Jeff, do you have any other questions you want to ask?
Similar to what I asked Techno last week, what do you think is the cleanest rule or concept or idea that I could find in Ishanekon World Shapers? What's the mechanic you're most proud of? What is the, if you take away all the other, like the many options, you take away everything else, if you're like, hey, I think I really nailed this, what stands out to you as a creator?
My favorite mechanic is narrative momentum, and more precisely cinematic actions. That's not something you see too common, which basically just allows you to go wild throughout the rulebook. And also, like, I think might help with the conflict. I want to do this cool, but that's not in the rules. The rules lawyer versus the rule of cool guys. Now you have a compromise. Yes, I would definitely say that's my favorite mechanic of the whole game. Originally inspired by I don't know how the tabletop is called. I have a colleague who's been playing for like 40 years, and every year he buys a new tabletop RPG system to get to know it. Like, he is a total veteran. And he told me about one. I sadly forgot the name. It's action movie inspired, where you don't really have abilities and such, but you have to describe how your character fights, what he does in the moment, and the more ridiculous it is, the higher the chance that he will succeed. If you say just, I punch that guy, that's not going to be good. If you say, I throw up the table into the face, oh, that's better. Or I swing up the candlelight, jumping onto the guy, slapping him so that he falls back into the other guy, then pushing him into the second guy. And that was the inspiration for the cinematic action, that giving you this free flow option. But yeah, I don't know how it's called. Maybe I could ask the colleague. I haven't seen him in a while. We used to be in the same team, but then I got switched to another team. And it's not like he gets in the office very often. What?
I was just going to make a joke of, so it's your fault you don't talk to him. Kidding. You moved to a different team.
I didn't choose the team switch. it was like, Jan, we need you in this team, and we don't really have anybody else we could put in there. Okay, I guess I don't really have a choice. I mean, you're asking me, but yeah, but I mean, we don't have to talk about work. I mean, one cool thing is my company actually sponsored me. They, in one of the YouTube videos will be an advertisement for them. They're always looking for more developers. So, and they're a very fun company. I mean, how many companies just sponsor you? I mean, they gave me the money over a year ago when I was like, I think I'm going to do a Kickstarter, but I have like 0 internet presence. But yeah, here and then.
That's very cool.
That's actually really rad. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish the people I work for was that rad. Dang.
I mean, they did not give me that much money, but fair enough.
Bruh. I just want to not be stressed all the time.
Yeah. They're a
That's
cool
my
company.
minimum. That's my minimum.
Yeah. I mean, I guess take this an unofficial advertisement. Fuck that Scene is a cool company, and
There
like
you
the
go.
adverb will come with the YouTube channel.
Okay, cool. I think we can work off of that question though. Like you've talked about like your cleanest and favorite mechanic. What about the opposite of that? Is there a mechanic that you maybe want to think about trying to tweak a little bit more often, or?
Like in the past, it was definitely the skill check system. It's a part that I had to work the most.
Mm-hmm.
I think I already told that story a couple of times on the stream. But nowadays, that's a good question. I'm kind of happy balance-wise, and I mean, I already went through so many iterations of most of the things. I think I got in a place where I don't want to change any fundamental rules anymore. But yeah, but in the past, definitely, like the skill check system. Until I got the pass system, this was also like, I'm thinking back into those clunky earlier versions where you had only 3 tiers, and there was no limit on your stats until you reach like the max of 17. So basically, everybody just invested everything in their primary stat because every other choice would have been dumb. And they had a way too quick of a power spike because of that, and the multi-attack problem. Like what I don't like, one thing I don't like about D&D, that you have this immense power spike at level 5, mostly driven by martial characters getting the second attack there, which doubles the damage output. And I had to tinker with different ideas. The pass system was like separate to the talents, where you had to choose every tier a new path. It was clunky. Yeah, the extra attack used to also be like a talent. Oh boy, like until I got the pass system, and I was like, yes, this is clean, this works. But yeah, nowadays I can't think of a single mechanic where I think I'm so unhappy with this, I want to fundamentally rework it. I'm more at the phase of adding more stuff and tweaking the balance a bit.
Yeah. And I mean, arguably, you could have just said that you're really just focused more on adding more stuff right now, and that's perfectly fine. Because you did say something about wanting to do essentially a DMG, though I guess it would just be a different section on your site on how to run games, build adventures, etc.
Yes, I want the systems to be fun for even if you're an absolute beginner. Currently, it's probably not so good for an absolute beginner, at least if you're the game master. There are ways to build a very simple characters. That's also like, yeah, I wanted to go talk a bit about the complexity system, right? When you mentioned that, it was when the ability started to add them, and I noticed I want this to be beginner friendly, but the system already had like 300 abilities. That's not beginner friendly. How to resolve this problem? And then I added this first the complexity system from 1, which means very simple, to 4, only for advanced players. But even then, you still had a lot of abilities, and then I added the beginner tag, which if you're really, this is your first tabletop RPG, you have no affinity towards role-playing games, just press the beginner tag, and it's really limited to the absolute basic choices. I also like that system, solving that, giving advanced players all these options, but not overwhelming newer players. That's also why it's in the general rules, it's the very first thing the complexity system. So like filter by the complexity system if you're new, please. I mean, yeah, if you don't have any questions, I can just babble randomly about stuff.
I don't have any other questions, Jeff.
No, I think at the moment, I think that covers most of, like, what I was reading through the rules yesterday. That covers all the big ones that kind of stood out to me.
Yeah.
Definitely want to. I definitely, when you get a GM section up, I definitely would want to read through that. Just, reading all the rules is fine, right? But really reading like a DM's guide or a GM section really helps interpret kind of, the designer's intent. Though in this case, I guess the way I say that seems a little odd considering I'm literally talking with the designer.
But I mean, I think your feedback would probably be very valuable as an experienced GM to see if you read that. But yeah, it's just I'm mostly just one guy, and there's so many things I want to do. It's
Yeah.
I think that's the one folly. I want to do it all, and I'm going to do it no matter how long it takes. Just
Yeah. Keep
5
that
years
fire.
later.
So for being a solo dev is a hard thing, right?
Yes. Also, I would love to if I didn't have to do all the marketing stuff. Like, just could I not just publish it? Nobody knows who I am, but everybody plays my game. Like, I would love that. Yeah, I don't need the glory. Just if I could exchange the fame and glory quotations marks with not having to do marketing, I would press that button immediately.
Yeah, sad. We can't be like the wind and, felt and not seen, right? Like, but yeah, sounds really awesome. I mean, I really enjoy looking at it, and like, it's not. I know I made a comment about like the creating the creatures can be a long-ish thing, but that's only compared to like other things I've created creatures or content for, right? Like, and it's only because of the fact that we are designing for each of those levels, which is not something that is done like you look at or done that often, because you look at like the most popular things, and normally creatures are the level that they are built for, period. There might be some ways of upping the level or whatever, but normally they are set in stone, and they're as good as they're gonna get.
Yeah, but that's also one of the reasons why characters like Beastmasters usually are so clunky. Because you try to press those creatures that just are statically designed, and then try to force them to, and then they're the obvious choice. They're basically stronger than everything else, and this hampers like player choice. But if you have a level for each character, okay, the Beastmaster level 1 starts with a level 0 bear, and then once they reach level 3, then the bear is level 1, and the same bear can scale with them. That's one of the big reasons. Also, the adaptability. Like, if you really want a strong goblin, you can get a strong goblin. This is especially with the all system agnostic thing. I don't know how strong the average goblin in your setting is. Maybe they're an absolute nightmare creature where a single one can destroy a whole city. Well, then take the level 15 version. Or maybe they're like in basically every setting, just weak, pathetic, and well, level 0 or level 1. So I really love the flexibility. And also, that really helps also with the reskinning, right? You want a tanky creature? Well, if you just had a static bear of level 3, but you need a tanky creature of level 7, well, tough luck. But now you can just take the bear and easily take the level 7 version and reskin it, and you have a very tanky creature. So yes, designing the singular creatures. Technically, you could argue it's like designing one level 15 creature, and then just with 15 steps before you reach level 15. But yeah, that's also slows down creature creation. But it's designing a level 3 creature would be simpler than designing a level 15 creature, because level 15 creatures have way more features and abilities and all that stuff. Yeah, what I also like is you can export one of the creatures and put them into the online creature builder if you want like the template of an official creature.
Yeah,
Other than
and-
that, I could talk about items and upgrades if you don't have any questions.
I mean, I was just going to make a side statement of one of the things that I really enjoy playing with is the encounter calculator you have on there. Just because it's just kind of fun to see, like, well, how many level 1 characters would it take to fight this many enemies? 35? 45?
The more extreme values have not been tested yet. It might be extreme if you take like bajillion weak creatures against one strong creature. Plus, also beware if the big creature has area of effect abilities. Like that's
Yeah.
a huge tactical advantage.
I mean, but statistically, no, I get you. I know that it's not a perfect thing. I just was wanting to shout out that feature of the site as just a little fun little thing.
It is rather helpful.
But yeah, I mean, items and equipment is a thing. If you want to go ahead, and what is the most interesting mechanic with your items and equipments that you want to shout out and talk about?
What I wanted was an intensive crafting and upgrading system, something that I severely missed about Dungeons and Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
What I one thing I really like about armors, for example, you have close, light armor, medium armor, and heavy armor. That's it. It's not like you have two different versions of medium armor. I mean, technically, yes, with different upgrades, but so the baseline. But it's not like one version is clearly stronger. Each of them have their advantages and disadvantages. I guess technically, if you ignore the weight penalty, heavy armor has the best stats. But again, it's compensated by the armor, plus you need the proficiency. And heavy armor like forces you kind of to make either a hybrid build or an high armor build, while clothes are excellent for just a really high evasion build. Maybe for context, like there are technically three main ways to defend yourself. But against attack, mainly two. Evasion is the classical armor class. If the enemy has to roll at least as high as your armor class, or they don't hit you. But that's really actively dodging, not like the armor value, which just subtract damage. So there's mechanical difference between the rogue that dodges all attacks and the knight in shining armor, which just stands there, everything hits him, but barely anything does a scratch. That's one thing I like about the armor. Also, like, there are three types of shield: light, medium, and heavy, which also modify the evasion cap and the evasion bonus, and that's also nice. But about the weapons, probably rather unique thing about my system, which was inspired by Dark Souls. Every weapon has two stats that you wield them with, a primary stat and a secondary stat. So, for example, you don't have the problem that a sword just works with strength and dexterity doesn't do anything, which is highly illogical since, any sort of realistic sword play, dexterity is far more important than your pure strength. So, swords have a primary set of dexterity and a secondary set of strength. The primary set is added to the damage and the hit chance, and half of the secondary set is added to the hit chance. So at level 1, you usually have +3 to damage and +4 to hit if you chose a weapon that fits your stats, right? You have, of course, many weapons that are with strength and dexterity, but you also have other combinations. Like blunt weapons, for example, have primary set strength, secondary set constitution. Weapon that needs more like grace to wield, like a whip, has primary set dexterity, secondary set charisma. Daggers have primary set dexterity and secondary set intelligence, because it's like you have to know, okay, where's the weak spot, where can ram the dagger in, taking advantage of that. There are 6 weapon categories. Simple are just like your basic things: daggers, axes, unarmed, most things that everybody can pick up and at least kind of use without any problem. Then there are medieval, that's the more advanced medieval stuff like swords, bows, crossbows, polearms. Then you have military, that's all your more modern weapons, shotguns, rocket launchers. Oh yeah, my system has area of effect weapons. They are like cube, like 2x2 weapons, or kind of flamethrowers style with a line, a 3-meter line, and weapons that just hit everybody around you, including allies, so be careful. Yes, then you have the tech weapons, which all have primary stat intelligence and all do elemental damage. They're, they have classical sci-fi names like Energy Blaster, Energy Blade, and such, but you can reflavor them as magical weapons, like magic wands that shoot fire and such. It's specifically also in the description of the weapon category in the rules. Feel free to reflavor them as magic wands, magic staffs, magical swords, and such. And in the example picture, they are also like magic wands and such. Then you have mind weapons, which have the primary stat charisma. That's the psychic stuff. That you've got like psychic blasters, but also instruments that do psychic damage here. And unearthly instinct, which has the instinct as primary stat, which does mystic damage, which is curse, spirit, and holy. Every weapon only needs 1 time of damage. You don't usually have an unearthly weapon that can deal times of damage, unless you get a Twilight weapon upgrade, which is a nice segment to upgrades. There's an extensive upgrade system. There are over 150 upgrades currently, and basically just like characters have tiers, items have tiers. Default tier is 0, and upgrades have tiers themselves. And you're usually limited to what you're crafting to crafting an item up to a tier of your same level, plus you need a crafting skill to do so. There are ways to get past it. The technology archetype, for example, their main feature allows you to craft items 1 level beyond your tier. 1 tier beyond your tier. And there are many crafting talents and also sub-archetypes that help you to go past that limit. But yeah, the nice thing is upgrades are not just like tier 1 upgrades. They are more advanced tier upgrades with 2, 3, 4, or even 5. But they are also neutral upgrades or even negative upgrades. So maybe if you want to make a weapon that's very, very precise, but is rather weak when it comes to offensive power, then you can use negative upgrades. There are also some fun options to have a cursed item with a negative upgrade. Or one thing I would also really like to do, there is a turret upgrade where you can, for -3, you can only use the weapon if you use an action to put the weapon down on the ground. Imagine like maybe a turret upgrade with the minigun, where you can just put +3 on damage to compensate for that, and just the one holding the line turret section style. Also, the crafting at the time you need to craft stuff is reasonable. Most upgrades do not take longer than 4 hours to craft. Higher tier upgrades usually take a bit longer. I think the longest is like 12 hours or something like that. So it's not like something I didn't like about D&D. The crafting system is basically useless. You need months of downtime to even craft the most basic of magic items. And that's also like a thing. Sorry, what?
I was just going to say 5e actually has crafting system. This is a joke,
yes,
because they don't really have great in-depth things about how to
it's like you want to craft something, fine, you have these loose rules that can basically be used in no campaign. And there's also a problem with D&D, the magic items just are not balanced. It can really easily break the balance. And that was also important for me with the upgrades, to make sure that it's you don't have like these huge bumps in power. Like weapons have a bit of a more linear growth, more controlled, and that way you can also give your players options to craft. Because if you give the players in D&D the option to craft everything very easily for very little money, very quickly, then you very quickly have extremely overpowered characters, because the magic items just are miserably balanced. So you solve that by not having a crafting system at all. But I really like crafting, and
Same.
But it's not. The system doesn't force you to craft. The game master can also just throw in upgraded items if you prefer the classical finding magical item stuff instead of having to upgrade that. My best friend also prefers that, so instead of relying for crafting, I occasionally throw in strong upgraded weapons. Also, like more thematically, it's not just a boring +3 to damage. For example, he plays the half troll, and I gave him a legendary barbarian giant killer weapon. It doesn't just deal more damage against giants, but also has a very high offensive power, but it is less precise because it's just so huge and so unwieldy that it has a -1 penalty to precision, like attack rolls, which I think is a nice way, especially like the whole campaign revolves around. I mean, something's funner, right? Giants are the main enemy.
I think kind of an interesting thing that has gotten lost since first and second edition, early D&D, was that the game was supposed to kind of take place in real time, meaning that between your sessions, a week would actually pass in-game as well as out of game, which means that your crafting rules could actually be designed to take time because you literally had built-in downtime. I think because of modern gaming, but yeah, so the original intent of these games was that you had actual downtime to be able to craft and do stuff. Modern game theory, though, it's a lot better for the player. It feels as though we've lost that as they try to make everything more episodic, right? You do the dungeon in one sitting, or you do this, and you end in the middle of it, so you come back to it as opposed to saying like, "Hey, you guys just don't get to the bottom of the dungeon."
Yeah.
You'll have to try again next week. If you wait too long and nobody can remember what happened, I'm going to refill the dungeon with monsters and we start over. I feel like if with a natural time constraint like that, crafting rules would be a lot simpler to make function, and it gives the players something cool to do outside of the game, right? Oh, we were going to that dungeon last Sunday. Man, I really wish we had something. If you have all week, the player who's the crafter can say, hey, on Wednesday night I was working on an item that the fighter can use to be able to grapple hook like Batman down there, and should be really cool. And the DM approved it. With not having that downtime built into the games, crafting can't really happen, even from like a creative standpoint, right? If you are sitting at the table with everyone and the DM says, okay, what do you want to do? And you say, well, I'm going to craft for the next 10 hours. The other 3 people at the table will probably say, well, we're going to go adventure then for 10 hours. Yeah. Meaning that you lose XP or you lose fun with your friends as almost an active punishment for trying to play your character. Give kudos to 5e for just throwing out crafting. If you're not going to build it into the system to be useful, it's only a punishment or detriment. Like, don't even put it in there if I could accidentally choose it and then stop playing your game, right?
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. Is personally, I'm a big proponent of adding crafting in the games. I think it's a very unique way of adding arguably non-combat centric characters without breaking any sort of immersion, right? But it takes time to craft. I mean, there is some solutions. I mean, having items that they could craft relatively quickly, a la things that you would normally have resource counting for, arrows, etc. But I mean, I think the way that Pathfinder 2 has handled alchemy arguably is probably the closest to gamifying that crafter within, like, not having that sort of like, well, I just want to sit here and craft, but also be like a part of the group of, they have a certain number of potions they get a day that are just a constant, hey, you're able to say that you crafted these items. Though I will say it's far from like my personal perfect version of it, but it is what it is.
I would say I was actually very lucky, kind of touching on what you were saying, and we were able to have a crafting character played by Marshall the Historian, if he's in chat. Because of real life things, he wasn't able to play in the campaign, but he built a crafter. So as part of the Discord, he basically played that NPC who's back at base, who's making the items for all the players to use when they go on mission.
Yeah.
And so he got to build that non-combat crafting character at the same time and play them and be able to design items and do all the fun stuff. He just never got to go on the actual missions, right? And that's that worked out well for him since he didn't have time to play. That feels a bummer if you're at the table already, right?
I guess we're kind of like separating from our original intent here.
I wanted to say how my system suffers. Like, first, yes, you can quickly craft. At the end of an adventuring day, you usually have like 2 or 3 hours to spare, which you can use to do some limited crafting. But also, if you specialize in crafting, you can really speed up the process and just hammer out easily 2 upgrades per day just on the side. I mean, especially like if you specialize in speed, you can almost you basically become a factory. There are different crafting skills with different talents attached to that. And I'm thinking about improvisation, which is all the talents and all the upgrades about improvisation are about just being insanely quickly at crafting. And most crafting sub-archetypes give you some way of reducing material and crafting time for the thing that's specialized in.
Yeah.
If you're really impatient and don't want to interact with the traditional crafting, you can also play as a technomancer, which can basically just ignore crafting time and material costs and just use willpower instead. I mean, they burn through their willpower very quickly, but I mean, if you have a backup weapon, yes, that you can help in fight. And most crafting characters are rebuilt. They are not useless in a fight. There's the artisan, for example, the weapons and armor crafter, which isn't just very quick and very good at crafting items, but he is very good at wielding the items crafted themselves. Then the alchemist, which is not just very good at crafting consumables and ability items, but also if they use them, they're really powerful. I think they are like more really support focused, but remember, you always have every level you get a talent and a great talent. If your sub archetype doesn't give you combat capabilities, you can still get them somewhere else. But to be honest, it was also important to me that you can make non-combat characters. So there purposefully are sub archetypes that don't give you anything for combat. And if you don't take any talents that make you good at combat, well, or any path, then you're stuck at combat. But that was your choice, and I want to give you that choice.
I'm that type of person. I'm gonna make the no combat choices.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, as long as the system, like 5e, unfortunately, is built around combat, right?
Yeah, they say they have other pillars, but I haven't seen them. Kidding.
Yeah. Yes, maybe that's also a point how I expanded the other pillars. My system has, I think, 34 skills, so that gives you more options for out of combat. Utility abilities was very important to me. There are many utility abilities that have to do with exploration, social interaction, and such. Of course, they are the sub-archetypes that only give you utility stuff. The expert, who specializes in a handful of skills and does them better than anybody else. The multi-talent, which is kind of the skill jack of all trades, which does all skills good. There is the thinker, which specializes in utility abilities. Oh yeah, the problem solver, which just gives you an insane amount of utility abilities. And eventually they get a feature that allows them to use every utility ability, just they have to spend more willpower to use one that they don't know. While the thinker is more about doing the utility abilities they know more efficiently. Is of course the tinkerer, also like a utility item crafter. Yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't specifically build anything for social interaction other than expanding the utility abilities and the skill checks. But to be honest, I like it when social encounters are not full of rules. I like the improvisation aspect, the role-playing aspect, instead of like in 4th edition where there were turns in social encounters, and I'm like, no, like, come on, dude. I want to. You like that system?
Well, yes and no, but like, because I talked about my system last week. Obviously, I have that whole concept where confrontations are not just conflicts, like they're not just battles, they're not just combats, because I like when, if it's something like you're in a heated argument, right? I would like to have that a little bit more set in the confrontation system in that time frame, because things are happening very quickly, and allows the players to like slow down and think about their actions so they can still play their character in those moments. But yeah, you're right. Like if it's just casual chat with Bob the farmer, then like that's not a confrontation. There's no like super need to go down and give everyone a turn order for every single action.
But we are taking turns right now.
We tried to. Yes. You're right.
But it's not written in the rules that, okay, now Techno talks, and you got 12 seconds, and when they're over, it's my turn, you know?
Hey, man.
No, I mean, it's kind of the social contract, right?
Right.
If we ask you a question, then you respond, right? I win initiative. What do you like about your system? You spend your turn responding.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, of course, your porch is also legit. It's just different people like different things, right?
Yeah. I like mayhem. You may not like mayhem. That's perfectly fine. No, I'm kidding. But I mean, Jeff's right. Like, yeah, if we could totally still have the sort of situation with structuring the back and forth with turns. Like, it's not necessarily a bad thing to do that, but that's obviously what you're saying, Blaze, is like literally that's kind of like everyone has a different cup of tea for that. They may like it when it's just a little bit more RP focused, more of the social contract than actually going and doing gamification and whatnot for those sort of situations.
Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe I would like it if I actually played it, but I don't think I like the free play. I like the free flow of role play. I like the balance between rules and role play. And I like both kind of guy.
I mean, sure. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't love it when the fluff and the crunch go together correctly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is, you put those potato chips on the tuna sandwich, so you get both.
But what type of chips?
Salt and vinegar. Or I'll accept jalapeno.
I will accept that.
Sorry, I do not like tuna and salt and vinegar. Like, can I bring my own sandwich?
you're...
I mean, that's literally what you did, right? The Ishanekon World Shapers is we just talked about the sandwich. You're like, I'm gonna go make mine.
And I mean, that was also a goal, that fluff and the crunch work together, because I love it when they work together.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, and I mean, I agree. I try to do similar with the games I make, and I think that's just a game design goal for all game designers, really, is trying to make sure that your fluff and crunch works together and not against each other. Because, I mean, if that's the case, as soon as your fluff and crunch start working against each other, you're going to break immersion, and it's just not going to be a fun time.
I mean, they don't necessarily have to work together, but against each other, yeah, that's bad.
Thanks for talking about your system, and
yeah, it was really
thanks
fun.
for answering all the questions.
Thanks for asking. Like, I love talking about my system. I mean, you saw my grin at the beginning. Like,
Yay!
I mean, it's been like my biggest passion for almost 4 years. So I love that thing. It's like if you ask a mother about their children, she won't shut up.
Yeah.
I know that because my mother does that. Ask her about me and my sister, and all the stories from the childhood are coming out. All of them.
I think we're going to go ahead and end the stream then here. Y'all have a great day. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye, everybody.